right. Good morning. It's good to see you this morning. It's always good to see you. If we haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Connor Woods. I am the youth pastor here at Calvary, and it is a joy and a privilege to serve you, your family, and your students. There's quite a few of us in this room. I don't know each and every one of you. I don't know your story. But if we were to spend some time together, I think one of the things that I would find, one of the things that we could relate to each other on is that there have been times in my life, I'm almost certain in yours, where it's been really difficult to see God at work, to see God's hand moving in our world, that the circumstances of our life often cloud our ability to see God moving and healing and His goodness and His mercy and His love. Have you been there? Has it been hard to see God at work? And this morning, as we study this man Elijah, there are some important lessons that God taught Elijah that are important for you and me to hear this morning. Elijah was a man who was very familiar with the world's brokenness. And I think we can find a lot of comfort in this man's response to God. So here's what I want us to see this morning. That God is never not at work. Forgive the double negative. God is never not at work. If you got a Bible, go ahead and grab that and meet me in 1 Kings chapter 17. If you don't own a Bible, the yellow or orange and white ones in the back, those are for you to keep. But 1 Kings chapter 17. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick timeline overview of who Elijah is and where he fits into the biblical story. So there was King David. We know King David. He had a son named Solomon. There was King Solomon. And King Solomon had a son named Rehoboam. And it was in Rehoboam's reign that there was a revolt against him, which resulted in the nation of Israel dividing into two kingdoms. There was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And what you'll find as you read this part of Israel's history, it's really a downward spiral in really every sense. It is a downward spiral. The southern kingdom, in this period of kind of separation, they had a few good kings. The northern kingdom had no good kings, no kings that worshipped Yahweh. And Elijah enters into this story about 60 to 100 years after the split of the northern and southern kingdom. So this is quite fresh in Israel's history. Elijah was a prophet of God living in the northern kingdom, so the kingdom that had no good kings. And during Elijah's life, we see that there is the most evil, the Bible says the most evil of all of the kings and queens of Israel. It would be Ahab, and you've probably heard of his wife, Jezebel. So Ahab and Jezebel. Elijah is regarded as one of the greatest prophets. Jesus is often compared to Elijah. And so you have the most evil king and queen set up against the highest regarded prophet. And it sets us up for a very interesting encounter. The reason Ahab and Jezebel were so evil, the reason the Bible calls them evil, is they actively invited and brought pagan false gods into Israel. So places to worship, it was permitted. And so this is why the Bible regards them as so evil. And fun fact about Elijah's name, his name actually means, my God is Yahweh. And so you have this man who's, my God is Yahweh, set up against the king and queen who have brought in pagan gods. And the two that we'll be concerned with this morning is Baal, who is the god of rain and fertility, and then Mot, who was the god of death. Elijah brings this declaration by the Lord that there will be a drought. He brings this to King Ahab. This is not just a challenge to King Ahab, it's a challenge to the god of Baal that they worship. Essentially saying, hey, only Yahweh is in control, and there's going to be a drought that Baal has no control over. He has no power. And we'll come to find out on this side that that drought would last 3 whole years. Ahab and Jezebel were furious. They put a bounty on Elijah's head. They were actively hunting him. And so the Lord directs Elijah to this brook near the Jordan where he provides in a miraculous way. And it's right here where we left off last week in 1 Kings 17:7. It says, after a while, the wadi dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Now is the time where people start to panic. And if you think about the nation of Israel, the surrounding nations, there was both a literal and a spiritual drought. There was a literal drought, and there was also a spiritual drought. Worship of Yahweh, true, undefiled worship of Yahweh, was nowhere to be found. They were in a spiritual drought. And while you and I may not be familiar with a literal drought, I think we can all relate to some degree that we've all felt a spiritual dryness where it feels like I cannot see God in my life. I cannot see God in the world around me. I do not feel His presence. I do not feel any sort of direction for Him. I have no answers. I feel totally lost. Have you experienced a spiritual drought? Right now, as we go through this story, we actually have a team from Calvary that's in Honduras providing clean water. They're building a well. And so I think it's fitting that that's happening alongside us reading this story and going through Elijah. Because even though we may not have experienced a literal physical drought, we have all experienced periods of spiritual dryness. Wondering, where is God in the midst of chaos? Where is God in the midst of confusion? Where is God in the midst of conflict? But remember, God is never not at work. That is what we will come to find. So read with me in verse 8 of 1 Kings 17. Then the word of the Lord came to him, get up, go to Zarephath that belongs to Sidon and stay there. Look, I have commanded a woman who is a widow to provide for you there. So Elijah got up and went to Zarephath. Now this town, Zarephath, was located in the nation of Sidon. And Sidon was the heartland of Baal worship. If you were to go back and read about Jezebel, she's actually the daughter of the king of Sidon. So for Elijah, this is enemy territory. This is enemy territory. God has called Elijah from his home country to what we read last week, a place of isolation where his only real tangible friends are birds that feed him. From that place of isolation to now, I want you to go into a territory that's actively hostile against me and will be actively hostile against you, Elijah. And so what is his response? Well, he goes. He simply goes. We don't see him argue or disobey. He goes. And can I challenge us for a second that following God will always put us in unfamiliar territory? Following God will always put us in unfamiliar territory. Now, what does that mean, unfamiliar territory? God will always call you out of your comfort zone. Always. That is a feature, not a flaw. Inevitably, God will call you out of your comfort zone for your good, for your sanctification, your becoming more like Jesus, and for the sake of the gospel. And this might not mean that you become a missionary, but it certainly will require you to put something on the line. Pride, prestige, status, money, convenience, maybe your life plans, and say, like we just sang about, I surrender all. God, wherever you would call me, whatever you would have me do, I surrender all. Friend, when is the last time you have followed God into unknown territory? Have you ignored his voice? Have you disobeyed his call? I can remember a time when I was in college and I was working at a donut shop and I was washing dishes. We had closed, and my shift lead was very antagonistic towards followers of Jesus. And I just getting to know her lived a very different life than I did. And I felt the Holy Spirit prompt me to engage with her in a conversation about faith. And as a natural introvert, that terrified me. That terrified me. And so as I'm washing dishes, I'm, trying to argue with the Lord, trying to rationalize, well, actually that wouldn't be a good idea. We could just get out of here. But he called me into unknown territory. I don't know what she's going to say. I don't know how she's going to react. She hasn't really talked about Christians all that well. Have you ignored his voice? Have you disobeyed the call? Return to him. Obey. Why? Because God is never not at work. I ended up saying, okay, Lord, well, I'll engage in this faith conversation. And to see how the Lord had softened her heart, and to see how the Lord was already working through other people just by asking her a simple question, was extremely profound and has been a marker in my life. Oh, okay. This is what God does. God, in a sense here, has prepared a table for Elijah in the presence of his enemies. And he believed this. And so do we believe this? Do we believe that no matter where we go, no matter what the Lord has called us to do, that he will set a table for us? In verse 10, it says, when he arrived at the city gate, there was a widow gathering wood. Elijah called to her and said, please bring me a little water in a cup and let me drink. Which is a hilarious thing to ask in the midst of a drought. Elijah, having traveled, the sun and the heat would have just been unbearable. There's nowhere for him to collect water because there's a drought. And so for him to ask this of this widow, he's really asking for something that's worth more than gold, worth more than money. He's asking for a cup of water. And what's this woman's response? Well, it's not what we would expect. In verse 11, it says, as she went to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. But she said, as the Lord your God lives, I don't have anything baked, only a handful of flour in the jar and a bit of oil in the jug. Just now I'm gathering a couple of sticks in order to prepare it for myself and my son so we can eat it and die. The first thing we see is, well, she actually goes and does what Elijah asks her to do. And the second thing we see is this really odd request. Hey, can you go grab me a glass of water in the midst of a drought? Okay, yeah, I'll go get you water. Oh, hey, and can you also bring me a piece of food back? That would be nice. It seems odd, but remember, God is all that Elijah has at this point. He has no nation. He has no king, earthly king. I heard a pastor say once, you don't know God is all you need until God is all that you have. And Elijah knew this. I mean, what else can Elijah do in this point of his life but just trust God? And the woman admits, I don't have any food. I don't have anything. In fact, the very little flour and oil that I do have left, I'm actually making for my very last meal. She has accepted her fate. She's gathered the wood for this last fire, surely through tears and heartache. She looks at this prophet in absolute defeat and says, I don't have anything. Have you walked in this morning saying, I just don't have anything? I'm just empty. This is it. I've exhausted everything. And if that's you, there's good news because this is not the end of the story. Verse 13, then Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a small loaf from it and bring it out to me. Afterward, you may make some for yourself and your son, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says, the flour jar will not become empty, and the oil jug will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the surface of the land. Elijah tells her, you will not go hungry. According to my God, you will not go hungry. The Lord will provide. And even in Elijah's instructions, do you see how much he's asking her to trust him? He's saying, hey, no longer bring me a piece, bring me a loaf. And don't just bring me a loaf, like give it to me first so I can eat, and then you can eat it, and then your son can eat it, which is completely backwards from human intuition to be like, no, I'm going to feed myself, or I'm going to feed my son first, then I'm going to feed myself, and then I'm going to feed this stranger that just showed up at my house. Like, I'm gonna look out for me and my family first, and then I'm going to give this guy some. And so what does she do? Well, in accordance to what we've already seen, she proceeds to do according to the word of Elijah. Psalm 34:9 says, "Fear the Lord, for those who fear him lack nothing." Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that those who fear the Lord, because they follow the Lord, for those who fear the Lord, get everything they want. Those who fear the Lord get everything they want exactly as they want it. Exactly when they need it. When they want it. No, it says they lack nothing. To some degree, this widow must have understood, okay, here's this holy man who fears the Lord. I mean, his name is literally, Yahweh is my God. It's a big ask. There's a lot of trust that Elijah is asking of this woman. She's an unlikely woman finding an unlikely hope in an unlikely place. And look what God does in verse 15. Then the woman, Elijah, and her household ate for many days. The flour jar did not become empty, and the oil jar did not run dry, according to the word of the Lord he had spoken through Elijah. The Lord provided. He made well on his promise, not just for his prophet, but for this woman, this son, this household that's not even part of God's chosen people. And so there's two important things that I think we see here before we continue in our story. The first one, hope is only found in God. Hope is only found in God. Against all of natural instincts and inclinations, the woman does as Elijah asks. And I thought in my preparation, why? Why? Why on earth would this widow, encountering this strange man, do what he says? Because if I'm being honest, if I'm in her shoes, I'm probably not going to look out for this stranger before I look out for me and my family. At least that's my kind of fleshly inclination. Why on earth would she do this? Well, if God can arrange birds to feed Elijah in the wilderness, he can certainly tune the heart of this widow, of this woman, to serve his prophet. I mean, could you imagine the desperation of this woman, this mom? Could you imagine her desperation? She has accepted the inevitable death that is upon her. And lo and behold, here comes this holy man who offers her hope. Remember, this is Baal's kind of territory, so to speak. And so as we understand that, you don't think this woman's already tried praying to Baal, sacrificing to Baal, praying to Mot? Like, you don't think she's already tried to say, like, hey, send some rain, send some rain? She's at the absolute end of herself. And while we don't really worship rain gods, fertility gods, gods of death, while we don't do those things, we are equally prone to grasp at different things when things start to seem out of control, seem outside of our control. Are you at the end of yourself? Are you at the end of yourself? Have you tried looking for hope in all of the wrong places? See, I think a lot of us think we're Elijah here, right? Boldly proclaiming the word, going where he's called us to in the face of adversity. We have this tendency to read ourselves into the heroes of the story, the stories that we see in Scripture. But oftentimes the Bible is acting more, less like a pat on the back in these types of narratives and more like a mirror, showing us, hey, actually you are the skeptic. You are the one in need of God. You are the one who's allowed false idols and false gods to infiltrate your heart. And sometimes you're the villain, which is not fun to read, if we're honest. So we're actually more like the widow here, That only after exhausting ourselves, trying to solve our problems by our own strength, by other gods, by our own means, with other things, only then will we turn to God. And here's what's amazing. Even though that's true of her, and maybe that's true of you, God doesn't dismiss her. God does not dismiss her. Remember, she recognizes Yahweh, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But he blesses her. He blesses her. He works a miracle in her life. Friend, no matter where you are in your life right now, look to God and God alone for your hope. Number two, God is often working in places that we would least expect. As she acknowledges Yahweh, it's very ironic in this narrative. You have this woman, a foreign nation, foreign land, worshiping foreign gods, who acknowledges Yahweh and who believes prophet of God. Contrasted with the very leaders of Israel who do not acknowledge Yahweh and who do not believe the prophet of God. It's incredibly ironic here. It was kind of understood in that time that Yahweh kind of operated within Israel. And then he wasn't really concerned with anything outside of Israel. But if you read the scriptures, if you read this story, it shows us quite the opposite. It shows us that it confirms God is the God of all nations. He's the God of all nations, especially those nations, and I would say particularly those nations that are actively set against him and are enemies towards him. You know, I don't think we would ever say this out loud. But have you caught yourself thinking and deciding, who that person may be like best suited or better suited to receive the gospel or to have a conversation about faith than this other person? Usually, again, we would never say that, but it usually shows up in like, oh, they're just not interested in faith, not interested in Jesus, not interested in the gospel. So I'm just not gonna engage. We just kind of immediately write them off. This is what I was doing, washing dishes. Oh, no, I know her. I know how she lives. I know what she believes. I know what she said. She's not interested in this conversation. And we play the role of the Holy Spirit as if we know how they'll respond. But church, we have to guard ourselves from writing off friends and family and coworkers and neighbors and strangers as too far gone. No one is too far gone. No one is outside of God's rule and reign. There's glorious news for us that nobody is outside, nobody is exempt from God's ability to save them. And it is not our job to save. I think that should be a huge relief on us. We plant the seed, and God grows the crops. This is a great paradox, this idea of that we see in Christian history where the church is most heavily persecuted, in the areas that are most set against God, is where the church actually thrives and grows. That's why right now one of the fastest growing churches is in Iran. God seems to have a particular interest in working among the least likely. Think about Jesus' own lineage. There are two women in particular, Rahab, the prostitute, and Ruth, the Moabite. Two women that were not from the nation of Israel, who were from nations that were set against God, and yet they're actually a part of Jesus' own lineage. It's fascinating. Women from places that were fiercely anti-Yahweh are in Jesus' family tree. God is not satisfied with the nations not knowing him. And he is constantly plucking and pulling and drawing people to himself from this tribe and this tongue and that nation. God is never not at work, and he's oftentimes working in places that we would least expect. And it's not our job to figure out where God is working. It's our job to just be obedient and go where he's called us to. But let's continue the story, because right now, this is awesome. The Lord's provided. They're eating every day. Granted, it's just bread. That might get old after a while, but nonetheless, they've got food to eat. Let's continue the story because it's going to take an unexpected turn unless you read ahead, and then you know where we're going. Verse 17, after this, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. His illness got worse until he stopped breathing. Some translations will say he died. She said to Elijah, "Man of God, what do you have against me? Have you come to call attention to my iniquity so that my son is put to death?" Here you have a glimmer of hope in a very hopeless situation, all of a sudden crushed by a sudden death. The woman, understandably, is furious, heartbroken, distraught. She blames Elijah for essentially tattletaling to God. She believes that this holy man drew God's attention to her life and to her sin, and in response, killed her son. And this is to be a common idea, a common kind of treatment of gods in the ancient Near East. This kind of idea of karma that, we just got to stay on this hamster wheel of appeasing the gods because, they're right there, they're ready to strike us down. But this is not the God of the Bible. God is not on the edge of his seat waiting for you to sin and mess up and then pow, he's going to get you. No, he, as he describes himself to Moses, is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, continually forgiving sin. And this woman, just when she thought, all right, my family's in the clear, got this holy man here, I guess his God is the one true God, her son gets sick and then dies. She blames Elijah, she blames God. And at a heart level, we can understand, we can empathize with that. And maybe you've walked in today and you felt angry with the Lord. I'm angry for what's going on in my life. I'm angry for what's going on in the world. You got bitterness and resentment towards him or towards someone else. I think a lot of us are more angry at God than we would like to admit. I know that's been true in my life. So what do we do with that? Because that kind of feels off the table. Like it feels like God's like, no, hey, clean that up, and then you can come to me. Like fix that anger thing, and then come to me. What do we do with that? Well, let's look at Elijah's response. This is verse 19. I think this is so incredibly comforting for us. Verse 19, but Elijah said to her, "Give me your son." So he took him from her arms, brought him up to the upstairs room where he was staying, and laid him down on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "Lord, my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow I am staying with by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself over the boy 3 times. He cried out to the Lord and said, "Lord, my God, please let this boy's life come into him again." What do we see? That Elijah, God's own prophet, has some questions. He seems stumped. He does not understand. And here's a beautiful truth, that our lack of answers or understanding doesn't make us a bad follower of Jesus. It makes us human. You got questions? You got frustrations? That's you're human. That's all of us. Your emotional state, whatever it is, doesn't prevent you from approaching the Lord. Didn't prevent Elijah. He's not saying clean that up and then come to me. He's not saying deal with your anger and then come to me. He's not saying deal with your bitterness and then you can pray to me. You ever prayed a prayer like that? You ever prayed a prayer like that? I mean, there's some frustration in there for sure. Like, God, did you bring this upon me because I sinned? Could you imagine someone praying that in small group? That would get really awkward really fast. Like, we got to have a one-on-one conversation after this. You cannot pray like that in small group. And let me encourage you this morning. God can handle imperfect prayers with complicated feelings. He can handle everything. In fact, he actually asks us to bring everything, to cast all of our anxieties, all of our worries, all of our fears, everything we are, lay it before the Lord. Where's the proof in that? Well, verse 22, the Lord listened to Elijah. Parents, you know there's a difference between hearing and listening. Listening is active. It's like I'm participatory. Like I'm here. I'm going to do the thing that kids, students, we're still figuring that out. I'm still figuring that out. The difference between hearing and listening. God's not merely hearing him, because God certainly hears our prayers, but God has focused his attention on Elijah. And what does he do? The boy's life came into him again, and he lived. Then Elijah took the boy, brought him down from the upstairs room and into the house, and gave him to his mother. Elijah said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know you are a man of God, and the Lord's word from your mouth is true." The last thing that we see in the story is that God is always bringing dead things back to life. And when we say that, we're not saying that every prayer for health is answered exactly as we want it to. We're not saying that Sparky the dog, we pray over him, we lay hands on him, he's going to come back to life. What does it mean? Well, I love what talking about this text, the Christ-centered exposition commentary says. It says we should ask God to do what only he can do. Most importantly, raise spiritually dead people to life. God is never not at work. The most miraculous thing, the most powerful thing that God can do for you and me is to bring us from spiritual death to spiritual life. In Ephesians 2, Paul says that all of us are equally guilty, dead in our sins, separated from a relationship with God because of our sin. But only through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection can that relationship be restored. We can have life both now and in the next life. In Luke's gospel, in chapter 7, Jesus talks about this story. He talks about Elijah raising this widow's son back from the dead. Jesus himself will in Luke 7, raise a widow's son from the dead. Some people thought Jesus was Elijah, but Jesus is no Elijah. Oh, he is far, far better. Far, far better. So you and I don't need to wait around for a holy man by happenstance to meet us and to raise us from spiritual death to life. Now, what is the difference between Elijah and Jesus? Elijah pleads to the Lord, "Lord, please let this boy's life come back into him." What does Jesus do? He just reaches out and touches him. He's healed, brought back to life. Friend, the same can be true of you this morning. You can go from spiritual death to spiritual life. The ESV Study Bible says, when faced with the God of death, that's Mott, the Lord, unlike Baal, unlike the things that you're reaching for, the things that you're trying to solve your problems, the things that you're trying to bring hope, he does not need to submit to death. He can cross the border from Israel to Sidon to bring life out of death. Friend, the same can be true of you today. God is never not at work. He has not given up on you. Your story is not over. He can move you from death to life. So here's our daily training. It's twofold. Number one, who is someone in your life that needs to go from death to life? Who's someone in your life that you know personally needs to go from death to life? Pray for them this week. Pray that God would give you opportunities to share the gospel, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and then pray for the boldness to actually do it. And then the second one's a little more personal. What areas of your life need to go from death to life? Maybe that means this morning, for the very first time, saying yes to Jesus, turning to him in faith, trusting him as your ultimate hope. That's step one. Maybe you've harbored anger against the Lord or against someone else. You've got this resentment and this bitterness towards God. Maybe you've got hidden sin in your life. Maybe you're like the widow. You've been searching for hope in all the wrong places and you just feel empty. Look to Jesus. Ask the Lord to bring you from death to life. Ask him to breathe new life into you. Ask God to break the chains that hold you captive. He will surely do it.